Sabbath in creation. Thanks. Sabbath in creation. Norman Vincent Peale said, Christians everywhere stand in need of the spiritual values inherent in the Sabbath. You know, in the core of that statement by Norman Vincent Peale is the idea that Sabbath or Sabbath keeping is not just the matter of a day. Christians everywhere stand in need of the spiritual values inherent in the Sabbath. It's not just the day. It involves much more, much more. It affects our life, our physical life, our spiritual lives. In the materialistic world in which we live, where gadgets have become more common and important than God, people get enslaved by the love of things. A day, the Sabbath, provides in a sense a divine lifeline that rescues us from things. Because the Sabbath elevates our thoughts for just one day above the world of matter, things, so that we can discover and rediscover the peace of God. And this peace comes when faith develops. This peace comes when faith, which is higher than mankind's idea of such things like science, history and goods and so on, faith lifts us to a belief in our past, in our present, and also in our future. When we think of the past in particular focuses on our divine origins. Where did we come from? When we think of the present, we're talking about what is the purpose of God for us now. And when we think of the future, we're talking about what our ultimate destiny is going to be. Now, our scripture reading, we focus on Genesis chapter 1. And you have there the creation of the world over 6 days, don't you? First of all, God created spaces. Right? He created heaven. He created earth. He created sea. The NIV translation said expanses, 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 spaces. And then what did God do? After creating the spaces, he then created things, inhabitants, beings, to fill those spaces. So, for instance, the expanse of the sea, he made fish to fill it. When it came to the air, the heavens, he filled them with fowl, birds. The land, animals, and of course, man as well. Genesis chapter 2, verse 2 and 3. By the seventh day, God had finished the work that he had been doing. So, on the seventh day, he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. So, God on the seventh day, so we talked about the sixth, now we're talking about the seventh. God on the seventh day creates something, but he doesn't create a thing in the sense of something you can touch. It's not an animal, it's not a tree, it's not a rock. He creates a space that's in time. A space in time. He created spaces, he filled the spaces. But on the seventh day, he created a space, but a space in time. It's also worthy to notice that the subjects of the creation of man and the creation of Sabbath are given greater coverage than any other. The creation of man, the creation of Sabbath. If you read the Genesis account again, there's so much spent describing and talking about those rather than the creation of birds or the sun and moon and stars, for instance. So all the creation events Let's look at them. Genesis chapter 1, right, verses 26 to 31. Right, Genesis chapter 1, 26 to 31. So you've got the creation of the whole earth from verse 1 through to verse 25. All the animals have been made, but then it describes the creation of man. Starting at verse 26. God said, let's make man in our image. Let him rule. Verse 27. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he, him. Male and female created he, them. So God blessed them. He said to them, be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth, subdue it, rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air and over every living creature that moves on the ground. Then God said, I give you every, and you know it very well, every plant which has seed in it, right? They'll be for you for food. And then he describes how for all the beasts they get something different. And then it finishes in verse 31, God saw all that he made now, and it wasn't just good, it was very good. Okay. Then the second verse, right, chapter 2, verse 1 to 3 is the creation of the Sabbath. Read it already, but just remind ourselves, the heavens and the earth were completed, right? By the seventh day God had finished the work that he'd been doing, so on the seventh day he rested. God blessed it, it says, because on it he rested. And then verse 4 to 25 of chapter 2, you have from then onwards, after the creation of the Sabbath, another discussion in regard to the creation of Adam. But then it was noticed in verse 7, the Lord God formed the man from the dust of the ground. He breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being. He planted a garden, it says, and that's where he resided until he began to name all the creatures. Then he noticed there was nobody to be with him. And God said it was not good. So he created Eve. And in all of those three, notice the Sabbath stands in the middle. Genesis 1, 26 to 31 closes with a long description of the creation of Adam. Chapter 2, verses 4 to 25, another long description of the creation of Adam, and also then the creation of Eve. And in the middle between the two is the Sabbath. So that's chapter 1, 26 to 31, which we've just covered. All right. Then the Sabbath, chapter 2, verses 1 to 3, is in the middle. The heavens and the earth are completed. And then again in verse 4 to 25 of chapter 2, you got a description of the creation of Adam, the placing of him in the garden, how he names the animals, but nobody was found for him, and so then God created from him. The man said, this is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman. And then it says at the end, Adam and his wife were both naked and they felt no shame. You know, the fact that the Sabbath comes in the centre, a dividing point, implies that it has a significant role. The fact that it is placed between those two, right? The seventh day Sabbath is a celebration of the inauguration of human history. It's a celebration of the beginnings of man. Look at Mark chapter 2 and verse 27. Mark chapter 2 and verse 27. When Jesus, speaking about who's the Lord of the Sabbath, says to the Pharisees, the Sabbath was made for who? Man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath. The Sabbath was made for man. The creation of man and the Sabbath, they come together. The Sabbath's in the middle between the stories of the two events there in chapter 1 and chapter 2 of Genesis. And the Sabbath then is a celebration of the inauguration of man, his creation. Think about it. Adam's first full day of life was on what day? The Sabbath. That was the very first day, full day, that Adam knew. The Sabbath. A day that we can presume that he spent not working, but celebrating with his Maker the beginning of God's creation, which were completed and perfect and were called very good. Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. Look at it again. Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, in our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." Man created to live in accordance with the image and example of the Creator, his Creator. Right? The image and the example of his Creator here is to work 6 days and rest the seventh. Yeah? And the Sabbath comes between the two story accounts of the creation of man. Look at the fourth commandment. We're looking at Adam's first full day here, right? The fourth commandment, Exodus 20. You probably know this by heart, quite a few of you. Okay, starting at verse 8. "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shall you labour. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, your son, your daughter, manservant, maidservant, animals, alien within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth and the sea, and all that's in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy." You know, this injunction that's mentioned here in the commandment to work and to rest is based on, as well as to imitate, the pattern that was established there in creation. Work 6 days, rest 7. Work 6 days, rest 7. So, the Sabbath day, then the seventh day, marks 2 points. First of all, it's a celebration of the creation of the world. This, by the way, is a picture of what's called the hand of God. It's a galaxy that they found not so very long ago, and it looks like a big hand, and they call it the hand of God. A celebration of the creation of the world. Philo calls this day the birthday of the world. The birthday. And on the Sabbath, each one of us can get a taste, a touch of creation's power. And this is part of the blessing of the Sabbath. When we look around us, and see what's there that God has made, the stars, for instance, all that's been made, then we can worship him. Look at what it says in chapter 14 of Revelation. Chapter 14. And verse 6 and 7. "I saw another angel flying in mid-air. He had the eternal gospel to proclaim to those who live on the earth, to every nation, tribe, language and people. And he said in a loud voice, 'Fear God, give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment has come, and worship him who made the heavens and the earth and the sea and the springs of water.'" When we focus on the blessing of creation, we can worship the one who made. Jeremiah as well, chapter 10. Jeremiah chapter 10, verse 11 and 12. "Tell them this," Jeremiah 10, verse 11 and 12. "Tell them this, these gods who did not make the heavens and the earth will perish from the earth and from under the heavens. But God made the earth by his power. He founded the world by his wisdom, and he stretched out the heavens by his understanding." So the seventh day, 2 points. It marks a celebration of the creation in general. It's the birthday of the world. It's a time we can taste and focus on the wonders of what God has made. But the second thing is that it's a celebration of man in particular. The Sabbath, Mark 2:27, was made for who? Man. So, the day is good news, right? It's good news of our roots. It celebrates our human beginnings. So to summarise so far, the Sabbath is rooted in creation, in the creation events. It marks the beginning of our human history. And when you think about that, that has a profound implication on all of us. Because Sabbath keeping is then not just a temporary Jewish ceremonial law. Because it's tied in with creation of everybody. It's a permanent precept for all creatures. Secondly, the Sabbath, rooted in the creation event, explains to us that we do not come about by any chance happening. And thirdly, we have our roots in the Sabbath. We belong in it. From Genesis right through into eternity. The two are bound together. Now, let's look at something else about the Sabbath. It's the seventh day after all, isn't it? 7. The number 7. Let me show you something about the way in which the story actually is organised. The way it's written and how cleverly written it is. Genesis again. Right, in that first chapter. We're going to be looking at some of the verses in chapter 1 and chapter 2. The whole of the Hebrew, which you can see there, that's Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 through to chapter 2, verse 3. Right? It reveals an amazing symmetry that's built around the number 7 and the multiples of 7. Genesis chapter 1 and verse 1 in the Hebrew up there is 7 words. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. 7 Hebrew words. Chapter 1 verse 2, which is now highlighted underneath it, has 14 words, twice 7. In verse 1 there are 3 nouns. God, Elohim, Hebrew. Heavens, Samein, I'll show you those in a moment. And earth, Erez. They are found in the story that follows on. Now, the name God, Elohim, is found 35 times. 7 times 5. Heavens, Samain, are mentioned 21 times. 7 times 3. Earth is also, Erez, mentioned 21 times. 7 times 3. And 3, as you know, in Scripture, is also a symbolic and a special number 2. Trinity, for instance. 3 in that, and it focuses in other places as well. Now, looking again at another expression, right? It was good. That's to do with, every day it was good. And then on the 7th day it was what? Good. Very good, that's right. 7 times it's mentioned. It was good. 7 times. And just the addition of the word very on one of them. In the Hebrew, in chapter 2, there are 7 words in the first part of the verse. And on the 7th day God finished his work which he had done. There are 7 Hebrew words. In the second part of chapter 2, verse 2, there are another 7 words. And he rested on the 7th day from all the work which he had done. You can see how the Hebrew words carry a lot more English words to them. It's more succinct. A Hebrew Bible is a lot smaller than the English Bible because we have to use a lot more words to describe their words. So in the first part of chapter 2, verse 2, Right? The first part of it, the seventh day God finished his work which he had done, 7 words. Second part, and he rested the seventh day from all the work which he had done, 7 words. And then in verse 3, you have again 7 words. So God blessed the seventh day and hallowed it. Is that an accident? No. It's been purposely written to emphasize 7, 7, 7. And it's all related to the Sabbath. The seventh day is mentioned 3 times for emphasis. In the Bible, 3 times refers to the importance of an action. Look at Numbers chapter 6. Numbers chapter 6, verse 23 to 26. Numbers chapter 6, starting at verse 23. The Lord said to Moses, "Tell Aaron and his sons, this is how you are to bless the Israelites. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace." Notice 3 blessings. This threefold repetition can be seen in this Aaronic blessing, which has threefold blessings to emphasize the fullness. In a similar way, God, on what he did on the 7th day, it is said, done, finished, created. Thrice. Emphasis on finished and fully done. You also have the same in, that's where done, finished, created. You also have the sense with rested, blessed, hallowed. Another emphasis on this 3. And on only this day do you have this special significance of the 3. After the introduction of Genesis chapter 1 verse 1, the story then is arranged in 7 sections. Each section corresponds to one of the 7 days of creation. And it's divided by the statement, you know it very well, and there was evening, and there was morning, 1 day, 2 day, so on. A 2nd day. And then you have that climactic moment, the 7th day, which we just learned already is repeated 7 times for emphasis. This shows that the Sabbath was the goal. The Sabbath was the conclusion. The Sabbath was the perfection of the whole of creation. It was aiming towards that event. We are created looking forward to the Sabbath. That was the very first day Adam enjoyed life. The Sabbath. We are created looking forward to the Sabbath. Work 6 days. The Sabbath is the goal. The Sabbath is the conclusion of your work. Here's a wonderful thought. You've worked 6 days, but the trouble is with many of our jobs nowadays, there are things that are unfinished, yes? But it is finished. Because you're in the Sabbath. Your work is complete. You've done your work. You're finished. It's over and done with. Forget it. Pick it up again on Sunday morning. That's the message here. It's complete. It's done. It's finished. You work 6 days. You're aiming for the Sabbath. That's the most important day. And everything before it ceases, ends, done away with, forgotten, laid aside. No need to worry about anything. The Sabbath is the goal. The Sabbath is the conclusion, the perfection of creation. So number 7 symbolizes completion. It symbolizes perfection. You have completed your work. You've done your 6 days. It's finished. You start again on Monday or Sunday. That's when it starts again until the next Sabbath. It's perfect because it's complete. Then you have a threefold repetition of the 7th day in chapter 2, verse 2 and 3. Right? The 7th day, see I've underlined them? On the 7th day, on the 7th day, on the 7th day. Threefold repetition of it. But you also have a threefold repetition of other things in there. God, 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 his work, his work, his work. Right? Made. Where's the other one? And on the seventh day, he ended, he made, right? And then made there again. Threefold repetition of that Hebrew word as well. Over and over again, this threefold repetition. All central to the message of what God created on the seventh day. In reference to the previous six, they're complete, they're perfect, they're over. Now, let's think about the meaning of the word Sabbath. The Hebrew word is Sabbath, and it basically means rest, R-E-S-T, rest. Why would God rest? He's omnipotent. He's all-powerful. Is a God who's all-powerful ever going to be tired? Certainly not. But Sabbath actually doesn't just mean rest. It means to stop. Sorry. It means to stop. It means to desist. It means to cease from doing. To stop. To desist. To cease. God regarded his creation as complete and perfect, so to acknowledge that, he stopped. He can't make it any better. And that's sometimes our problem as human beings. We are never satisfied. We're always titivating. We're always going back to it. That's why I go back to what I said again. We work 6 days. The 6 days are over. It's finished. Over and done with. It's perfect. We go on now to rest the Sabbath day. It's the completion. It's the goal. It's the climax. God regarded his creation as complete and perfect, and to acknowledge it, he stopped. He had no need to proceed further in any other creations. Man was the climax of his creation. He now no longer saw a need for any more work. Rest means rest after work is accomplished. So God stopping stamps a seal on the fact that God said it was very good. Why do any more? So Sabbath then is a mark of our faith and a belief in a God, a perfect God, who creates perfectly. You know, some say, looking at the present world, that he created a mess, or he began it and he left it to get out of control and for evolution, nature to take over. But the very Sabbath shows us that that is not the case at all. The Sabbath is a sign of the fact that he made it perfect in the beginning. It's sin that's made it into a mess. Secondly, the Sabbath is thinking of man. The Sabbath, considers man. God considers man the most important aspect of his creation. God considers man, and the Sabbath also is part of that, the man who he would die for. And so doesn't seek to alter his creation in any way, because man is the ultimate. You're special. We mustn't forget it. The Sabbath actually proclaims that we're special. That is indeed good news, isn't it? That is indeed good news. We are special. God made us and he gave us the Sabbath to mark that we are special, that we can celebrate this day, the most important day of creation, in a God who made perfectly. And he loves us, and that's why he gave us the day. Let's celebrate the Sabbath every 7 days. Let's forget the worries of the last 6 days when the Sabbath. I remember years ago, one man, he was in business, he worked in Louth, but he went to Grimsby Church. And when you're a businessman, you got your own business. I'm not being in that position, but I can appreciate it. There's an awful lot to worry about. And he said he would get to church on a Saturday morning and it's still buzzing around. But, within minutes, he said, of getting into church, it just disappeared. That's the wonder of God's Sabbath. It takes away. We can celebrate God's wonderful creation. And that's you and me as well. He loves us that he would die for us. We're the centre, the pinnacle, the very bit in a sense that comes for which the reason the Sabbath was made. Let us enjoy it together. Shall we pray?